I never thought I'd be the type of person to create a contract for family members. But when my mother-in-law announced she was selling her house to move in with us, just until she found a new place, with a moving truck already packed in her driveway, I knew words alone wouldn't protect our sanity. The look on Diane's face when I slid that document across the table? Priceless. She thought she was getting a key to our kingdom. Instead, she got a reality check in 12-point font. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'll never forget that Sunday afternoon in October. The crisp, autumn air had just begun to turn chilly, and I'd spent the entire morning transforming our back patio into a cozy retreat. String lights twinkled overhead, new cushions brightened our wicker furniture, and my prized collection of container herbs created a fragrant boundary around our space. This was my sanctuary, the place where Mike and I ended each day, mugs of tea in hand, sharing stories from our separate worlds before they merged again in our home. I was adjusting the last pot of basil when the doorbell rang. Not once, which would be normal. Not twice, which might indicate impatience. 3 times in rapid succession, followed by knocking. Only one person in our lives announced themselves, with such dramatic urgency, my mother-in-law, Diane Chen. "Emma? Michael? Are you home?" Her voice carried through the open windows. I took a deep breath, brushed the soil from my gardening gloves, and headed inside. Mike was already at the door, his expression a familiar mix of affection and wariness that appeared whenever his mother made an unannounced visit. "Mom, this is a surprise," he said, accepting her embrace. "Is everything okay?" Diane Chen, former high school principal, perpetual organizer of other people's lives, and my matrimonial cross to bear for the past 5 years, swept into our living room with the authority of someone who owned the place rather than someone who visited occasionally. Can't a mother check on her son without there being an emergency? She placed her designer purse on our coffee table, directly on top of the book I'd been reading. Though, now that you mention it, there is something important we need to discuss. My stomach tightened. In Diane's vocabulary, something important usually translated to something Emma won't like, but will be expected to accept graciously. I slipped my hand into Mike's, a silent signal we'd developed over years of navigating his mother's important discussions. "Let me make some tea," I offered, needing a moment to compose myself. "No need, dear," Diane waved dismissively. "This won't take long." Mike gestured toward the couch. "Let's sit, Mom. Is Dad okay?" The concern in his voice was genuine. Harold had suffered a minor stroke 3 months ago, and though he'd recovered remarkably well, any unplanned visit from Diane triggered immediate worry about his health. "Your father is fine," she said, settling primly on our sofa. "But that's actually related to what I need to discuss. You know we've been talking about downsizing since his health scare." Mike nodded. "The stairs in your house aren't ideal for his recovery." "Exactly." Diane smiled approvingly, like a teacher whose student had arrived at the correct answer. "Well, I've made a decision. I'm selling the house." "That's probably wise," I said, relief washing over me. The Meadowbrook house was far too large for 2 people, especially with Harold's mobility issues. "Have you found a nice single-level place?" Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not exactly. The market is so competitive right now. Properties are being snatched up before they're even officially listed." Something in her tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'd spent enough time with my mother-in-law to recognize when she was circling her actual point. "That sounds frustrating," Mike said, oblivious to the warning signals flaring in my mind. "But you've always been good at finding exactly what you want." "Indeed I have," Diane replied, reaching over to pat his knee. "And what I want, what your father and I have decided is best, is to move in with you two." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Move in?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. Just temporarily, she added quickly, though the word held no reassurance. Until we find the perfect place. I've already listed our house with Caroline. You remember her, Michael. She was your math teacher in 10th grade. And she thinks it will sell within weeks. We've already packed up most of our things. I glanced at Mike, whose expression had frozen somewhere between shock and panic. Mom, that's a big decision. One we should probably discuss as a family. That's what we're doing now, dear. Her tone suggested this was merely a formality, not an actual consultation. Your father and I thought it through carefully. It makes perfect sense. You have that spare bedroom just sitting empty, except for Emma's little crafting projects. And the guest room can store some of our essentials until we find our new home. My crafting projects. She meant my home office, where I conducted telehealth appointments and did all my patient paperwork. The space that allowed me to work from home 2 days a week and maintain my private practice alongside my hospital position. Diane, I began carefully, my office isn't a spare room. I see patients there. She waved this away like an annoying fly. You can easily move all that to the basement. It's finished space going to waste. Besides, your father needs a proper bedroom on the main floor during his recovery. Before I could respond, Mike intervened. Mom, we can't just make a decision like this on the spot. Emma and I need to talk it over. How soon were you thinking this would happen? Diane's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened slightly. Well, as I said, the house is already on the market. Caroline is holding an open house next weekend. I was hoping we could move some of our things over this Wednesday. Wednesday? I fought to keep my voice level. As in, 3 days from now? Harold's physical therapist recommended we transition sooner rather than later, she said, an expert deployment of medical necessity as tactical advantage. The stairs in our house are becoming too much of a risk. I looked at Mike, silently pleading for him to recognize the manipulation at play. His father's health was being used as a battering ram against our boundaries, a strategy Diane had employed with increasing frequency since Harold's stroke. We understand Dad's health is the priority, Mike said slowly. But this is happening. Very fast, Mom. We need some time to prepare to figure out how to make the space work. He glanced at me apologetically. Maybe we could help you find a short-term rental instead. Diane's expression shifted to one I recognized all too well, wounded disappointment with an undercurrent of judgment. A rental? For your father during his recovery? I never thought I'd see the day when my son would suggest his parents should live among strangers instead of with family. And there it was, the guilt trip, expertly deployed. I watched Mike's resolve crumble in real time, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of filial obligation. That's not what I meant, Mom. Of course we want to help, it's just wonderful, Diane interrupted, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folded paper. Here's a preliminary list of things we'll need to accommodate your father's condition. Nothing major, just some grab bars in the bathroom, clearing pathways for his walker, and of course we'll need space in the garage for my car. As she handed Mike the list, which looked far from preliminary given its length, I felt a familiar sensation building in my chest, that particular blend of frustration and powerlessness that only Diane Chen could evoke. This wasn't a request or even a discussion. It was a fait accompli, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. We'll also need your help with the moving company on Wednesday, she continued, scrolling through her phone calendar. They're scheduled to arrive at our house at 9, so they should be here by noon. Oh, and Michael, your father will need your assistance setting up his medical equipment. My eyes met Mike's over his mother's head, and I saw the conflict there, the desire to support his parents warring with the recognition that boundaries were being steamrolled. But I also saw which side was winning, and it wasn't ours. I'll need to take the day off work, he said, already mentally rearranging his schedule. I should let my supervisor know tomorrow. Perfect. Diane beamed at him, then turned to me with significantly less warmth. Emma, I assume you'll want to clear out your office before we arrive. Harold will need a space with good natural light for his recovery exercises. The presumption stunned me into momentary silence. Not, would you mind clearing out your office, or even, could we use your office? But the assumption that I would simply vacate my professional space on demand. I have patients scheduled for telehealth appointments on Wednesday, I said, finding my voice. I can't just cancel them with 2 days' notice. These are people recovering from surgeries and injuries who depend on consistent care. Diane's expression suggested I was being deliberately difficult. Surely they would understand a family emergency. Or can't you just use one of those virtual backgrounds? No one would know you're in the basement. The basement, where the Wi-Fi barely reached. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Where the ceiling was too low for proper movement assessments, where none of my equipment or reference materials would be accessible. It doesn't work that way, I started to explain. But Diane had already moved on, detailing where various pieces of their furniture would fit in our living room. Our living room, which we had spent months furnishing and arranging exactly as we wanted it. As Diane continued outlining her plans for our home, my sanctuary, my carefully curated space, something shifted inside me. The sensation was foreign, yet familiar, like rediscovering an old piece of clothing at the back of a closet and finding it still fits. It was the feeling of my spine stiffening, of boundaries crystallizing. Diane, I said, cutting through her monologue about curtain replacements. Mike and I need to discuss this privately before making any decisions. This affects both of our lives significantly. She looked at me as if I'd suggested something absurd. What is there to discuss? Family helps family. Harold needs a safe place to recover, and you have the space. We have our own lives and schedules, I countered, ignoring Mike's warning glance. If we're going to do this, we need clear boundaries and expectations. Diane's smile tightened. Boundaries? Between family members? Emma, dear, that's rather cold, don't you think? Before I could respond, Mike stepped in, his mediator instincts kicking in. Mom, Emma's right that we need to talk this through, but I'm sure we can work something out that helps Dad and respects everyone's needs. Diane stood, mission accomplished. Of course you'll work it out. You're good children. The emphasis on good hung in the air like a threat. I should get back to your father now. He tires easily these days. Another strategic deployment of Harold's condition. As Mike walked his mother to the door, I remained seated, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a temporary living arrangement. This was about the fundamental dynamics of our marriage, our home, and my relationship with Mike's parents. If I didn't take a stand now, I might never reclaim my ground. The door closed, and Mike returned, exhaling heavily. Well, that was ambush, I supplied. Invasion? Coup d'etat? He sank onto the couch beside me. I was going to say unexpected, but your words work too. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his processing mechanism. What are we going to do? You mean, what are we going to do about your mother moving herself and your father into our home with 3 days' notice? Or what are we going to do about the fact that she expects to rearrange our entire lives around her preferences? Mike winced. When you put it like that? How else should I put it, Mike? She's not asking. She's telling. And she's using your dad's health as emotional leverage. Dad does need help, he said, his voice softening. The stairs in their house are dangerous for him right now. I took his hand, trying to balance empathy with firmness. I know, and I want to help too. Your dad is a wonderful man who's been nothing but kind to me. But this isn't about whether we help. It's about how we help and whether we have any say in what happens in our own home. Mike nodded, conflict evident in his expression. You're right. Mom's approach was overwhelming. But what options do we have? They've already listed their house. Without consulting us first, I pointed out. That was a deliberate strategy, Mike. Create a situation where we can't say no without looking like monsters. He sighed, acknowledging the truth of this. So what do we do? I considered the question carefully. Direct confrontation with Diane rarely worked. She was too skilled at turning conversations to her advantage, at making legitimate concerns sound selfish or petty. We needed a different approach. If they're going to live here, I said slowly, we need clear terms, written down, agreed upon in advance. Mike looked puzzled. Like a contract? Exactly like a contract. A house rules agreement that spells out expectations, responsibilities, and boundaries. His eyebrows shot up. Mom will hate that. Probably, I agreed. But if she refuses reasonable boundaries, that tells us something important about her intentions, doesn't it? Mike was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. I could see him weighing family peace against the protection of our marriage. It wasn't an easy calculation. Diane had spent decades ensuring that her son's loyalty would be difficult to redirect. What would this contract even say? He finally asked. I felt a small surge of hope. He wasn't dismissing the idea outright. Basic, respectful household guidelines, privacy expectations, consultation before making changes to our home, defined, duration of stay, financial contributions. Financial contributions? Mike looked alarmed. Mom will definitely push back on that. They're selling their house, Mike. They'll have funds. And if they're living here, using utilities, eating, food we buy, they should contribute. That's reasonable. He nodded reluctantly. I guess so. But approaching this like a business transaction feels cold. Colder than being told to move my professional practice to the basement? Colder than having our living room furniture rearranged without our input? I tried to keep the hurt from my voice but wasn't entirely successful. Mike reached for my hand. You're right. I'm sorry. Mom has always been forceful. But that doesn't make it okay. This isn't about punishing. Your mom, I said, squeezing his hand. It's about protecting our marriage and our home. If we don't establish boundaries now, before they move in, we never will. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Okay, let's write this contract, but we do it together, and we present it to them together. United front. Relief washed over me. United front, I agreed, leaning in to kiss him gently. That's all I'm asking for. As Mike went to get his laptop, I stared out at the patio I'd spent the morning perfecting. My little sanctuary might soon be overrun with medical equipment and Diane's opinions, but perhaps, just perhaps, a different kind of boundary could protect what mattered most. The next morning, I called in late to work and met Jessica, my closest friend and confidant, at the daily grind. If anyone could help me navigate this situation with both firmness and grace, it was Jess. As a family law attorney, she understood the delicate balance of legal protection and family dynamics. She did what? Jess nearly spat out her latte when I explained the situation, without even asking first. Classic Diane, I sighed, warming my hands around my mug. The house is already on the market. They're showing up Wednesday with a moving truck. Jess shook her head, her curls bouncing with indignation on my behalf. And Mike? Where does he stand? Caught in the middle, as usual, I said, trying to be fair. He agrees we need boundaries, but he's worried about his dad's health, and you know how Diane wields guilt like a scalpel. So, what's your game plan? Please tell me you're not just rolling over for this. I straightened my shoulders slightly. Actually, I've convinced Mike we need a formal agreement. House rules in writing. signed by everyone. Jess's expression brightened with professional interest. A cohabitation agreement. I'm impressed, Emma. That's exactly what I would recommend. Mike thinks it's cold, I admitted. Part of me wonders if he's right. Would it be warmer to let resentment build until your marriage cracks under the pressure? Jess raised an eyebrow. Trust me, I've seen too many couples destroy their relationships by avoiding difficult conversations in the name of keeping peace. She pulled out her tablet and opened a notes app. Let's draft this properly. What are your non-negotiables? I'd been thinking about this all night. My office remains my office. I need that professional space. Absolutely, Jess nodded, typing. What else? Defined duration of stay, 3 months maximum, with the expectation they're actively looking for their own place. Good. Concrete timeline with clear expectations. Financial contribution to household expenses, I continued, gaining confidence. They're selling their house. They'll have funds. Fair and reasonable, Jess agreed. What about day-to-day boundaries? I thought about all the little intrusions that had accumulated during shorter visits. Privacy, no entering our bedroom, without invitation, knocking before entering any room with a closed door, no rearranging furniture or decor without mutual agreement. Jess typed rapidly, occasionally suggesting additional clauses or refining my wording. By the time we finished our coffee, we had a comprehensive document that was firm, but fair, protective, without being punitive. This is good, Emma, Jess said, reviewing what we'd drafted. It establishes clear boundaries while still supporting Harold's recovery needs. If Diane has a problem with these very reasonable terms, that's valuable information about her actual intentions. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Having the issues laid out so clearly made them seem manageable rather than overwhelming. Thank you, Jess. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably commit justifiable mother-in-law aside? She joked, then grew serious. Remember, this isn't just about the next few months. How you handle this situation will set the tone for your relationship with Mike's parents for years to come. I nodded, the responsibility of that reality settling on me. I know. That's why it has to be right. Firm, but fair. And united, Jess emphasized. Mike needs to present this with you, not as your messenger. He's agreed to that much. At least, I said. United front. Then you're already halfway to success, Jess said, giving my hand a squeeze. Now you just need to stick to it when Diane deploys the guilt artillery? As I drove to work, I felt a curious mix of anxiety and determination. Tonight, Mike and I would refine the draft into our final proposal. Tomorrow, we would present it to his parents when they came for dinner. A dinner I'd suggested as a more appropriate setting to discuss the details of our new living arrangement. The wheels were in motion. The question now was whether Diane would recognize the new boundaries being drawn, or attempt to bulldoze through them as she had so many times before. Either way, something fundamental was about to change in our family dynamic, and I was finally ready for it. I spent the rest of the day at Sunrise Medical Center focusing on my patients while mentally rehearsing how tonight's conversation with Mike would go. We needed to finalize our house rules contract, and I was determined to make it balanced. Firm enough to protect our home life, but reasonable enough that Mike wouldn't feel he was betraying his parents. When I arrived home that evening, delicious aromas filled our house. Mike stood in the kitchen stirring something on the stove, his special coconut curry, my favorite comfort food. My heart swelled at the gesture. You cooked, I said, setting down my work bag and crossing to kiss his cheek. Thought we could use a good meal for what might be a difficult conversation, he replied, wrapping one arm around my waist while continuing to stir with his other hand. How was work? Busy. Mrs. Harrington can finally bend her knee past 90 degrees. I peered into the pot. This smells amazing. I also opened that bottle of Riesling we've been saving. He nodded toward 2 glasses already poured on the counter. Figured we might need it. We ate at the dining table rather than our usual spots on the couch. A small acknowledgement that tonight's discussion was important. Mike had already set up his laptop, the draft agreement from my session with Jessica displayed on the screen. "I've been thinking about this all day," he said, taking a sip of wine. "I agree with most of what you and Jess came up with, but I think we need to tweak some things to make it more palatable for Mom." I tensed slightly. Palatable how? We're not asking for anything unreasonable. I know, he assured me. But presentation matters. If Mom feels attacked from the beginning, she'll never agree to anything. I took a deep breath. Mike wasn't wrong. Diane was expert at perceiving criticism where none existed, and equally expert at dismissing legitimate concerns as personal attacks. What did you have in mind? For starters, I think we should call it a family living agreement, instead of a contract or house rules. Less confrontational. Fine, I agreed. The name wasn't important, the content was. And I think we should start with what we're happy to provide. The comfortable bedroom, home-cooked meals, help with Dad's appointments. Show that we're coming from a place of generosity. Before listing all the ways we want to restrict your mother, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Mike ran a hand through his hair. That's not... Emma, please. I'm trying to find a way forward that doesn't turn this into World War III. I softened, recognizing his genuine effort to balance everyone's needs. You're right. I'm sorry. Starting with the positives is smart. I reached for his hand across the table. I just don't want the boundaries to get lost in the pleasantries. They won't, he promised. We're still going to be clear about duration, financial contributions, and respect for our space. I'm just suggesting we sandwich it between affirmations of family support. We spent the next 2 hours revising the document, occasionally disagreeing but mostly finding common ground. Mike was right about some of my initial phrasings being too abrupt or accusatory. I was right about needing concrete timelines rather than vague intentions. By the time we finished, we had a 3-page agreement that felt balanced, supportive of Harold's recovery needs while protective of our marriage and home. Do you think she'll sign it? I asked as we saved the final version. Mike hesitated. Honestly, her first reaction will be offense, but Dad will see the reasonableness of it. He's always been the practical one. And if she refuses, then... He took a deep breath, and I could see this was difficult for him. Then we'll have to tell them they need to find another arrangement. I blinked in surprise. I hadn't expected such a firm stance. You'd be willing to do that? I don't want to, he admitted, but I'm not willing to sacrifice our home life, and your happiness either. They created this situation by listing their house without consulting us. If they reject reasonable boundaries, that's their choice. I leaned across the table and kissed him, feeling an overwhelming surge of love and gratitude. Thank you for standing with me on this. Always, he said, squeezing my hand. United front, remember? The next evening arrived too quickly. I'd spent the day alternating between rehearsing my talking points and distracting myself with work. Now, as I chopped vegetables for dinner, my stomach churned with anxiety. In less than an hour, Diane and Harold would arrive, and we would present our family living agreement. Need any help? Mike asked, entering the kitchen freshly showered and smelling of sandalwood. You could set the table, I suggested. The good plates, I think. He raised an eyebrow. The wedding china? Are we celebrating something? No, but it'll be harder for your mother to cause a scene over fine porcelain. I was only half joking. Mike chuckled, but the sound held more tension than humor. Good strategy. I'll get the good wine glasses too. As he arranged the table, I noticed he'd printed 2 copies of our agreement, each in a crisp blue folder. The sight made everything feel suddenly very real. We were really doing this, setting formal boundaries with his parents in writing. The enormity of it made my hands tremble slightly as I sliced the last bell pepper. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. Harold and Diane were nothing if not punctual. "I'll get it," Mike said, touching my shoulder gently as he passed. "Deep breath. We've got this." I nodded, arranging my features into what I hoped was a welcoming smile as I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and followed him to the door. "Michael! Emma!" Harold's warm greeting broke some of the tension as he entered, leaning on his cane but looking stronger than when I'd last seen him. He enveloped Mike in a one-armed hug, then extended the same to me. "Something smells wonderful." "Herb-crusted salmon," I said, genuinely pleased to see him. Harold had always been kind to me, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to Diane's forceful personality. "One of your favorites." "You remembered," he said with a touched smile. Diane followed behind him, immaculately dressed as always, carrying a bakery box. We brought dessert, chocolate mousse cake from Hanson's. "Thank you, that's thoughtful," I said, accepting the box and leading them into the dining room. "Dinner's almost ready. Can I get you both something to drink first?" "Just water for Harold," Diane answered before he could speak. "His medication, you know." Harold's expression flickered briefly with something like annoyance. "Actually, the doctor said 1 glass of wine with dinner is fine now." "Are you sure that's wise, dear?" Diane's tone suggested it most certainly was not. "Quite sure," Harold replied with unexpected firmness. "I'll have a small glass of white, please, Emma." I exchanged a glance with Mike, noting this small rebellion with interest. Perhaps Harold wasn't as acquiescent to Diane's control as he usually appeared. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Harold asked about my work at the medical center, and Mike shared an amusing story about a student's creative interpretation of network security protocols. Diane commented on the table settings. "These plates must be difficult to clean properly. And the curtains. Have you considered something less heavy for this room?" But her critiques were mild by her standards. As we finished the main course, Mike caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. "So," he began, his voice carefully casual, "Emma and I have been discussing your move-in plans." Diane brightened. "Yes, we've made a list of what furniture we'll bring. Nothing too large, just Harold's recliner. He needs proper back support. And my cherrywood bureau. Oh, and our bed, of course. That guest room mattress is far too soft for Harold's back." I felt a flash of irritation. She was already planning to replace our furniture before even moving in. "Actually, Mom," Mike continued steadily, "before we finalize any details, we wanted to discuss some parameters that will make this arrangement work for everyone." Diane's smile faltered slightly. "Parameters?" "Yes," I joined in, keeping my tone light. "Since we'll be sharing living space, we thought it would be helpful to have clear expectations from the beginning." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Makes good sense. Clear communication prevents misunderstandings." Diane looked less convinced, but said nothing as Mike reached for the blue folders beside his plate. "We've put together a family living agreement," he explained, sliding a folder toward each of his parents, "just to make sure we're all on the same page about how this temporary arrangement will work." "An agreement?" Diane's voice sharpened as she opened the folder. "What is this? A rental contract? We're family, not tenants." "It's not a rental contract," I said carefully. "It's a mutual understanding of boundaries and expectations." Harold adjusted his reading glasses and began scanning the document with interest. Diane, however, barely glanced at the first page before looking up, her expression hardening. "Financial contribution? You expect us to pay you? After everything we've done for you?" Mike remained calm. "It's a reasonable sharing of expenses. Mom, you and Dad will be using utilities, sharing meals, occupying space. We're not asking for profit, just help with the increased costs." "This is offensive," she declared, pushing the folder away. "Your father is recovering from a stroke, and you're treating us like boarders in a rooming house." "No one is treating you like boarders," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "We're acknowledging the reality that 4 adults living together requires structure and shared responsibility." Harold, who had been quietly reading through the entire document, looked up. "The financial contribution seems reasonable, Diane. We'll have funds from the house sale sitting in an account doing nothing. Why shouldn't we help with expenses?" Diane shot him a look of surprised betrayal. "That's not the point, Harold." "Then what is the point?" he asked mildly. She didn't answer him directly, turning instead to Mike. "What's this about a 3-month limit? What if we haven't found a suitable place by then?" 3 months is plenty of time to find housing in this market, Mike replied. "If you need more time, we can discuss an extension. But having an endpoint is important for everyone." "And these private spaces," she continued, flipping pages aggressively. "Emma's office off limits unless invited? Our bedroom door closed at all times when we're not home? It sounds like you don't trust us in your house." "It's not about trust," I interjected. "It's about respecting each other's privacy and personal space, just as we would respect yours." Diane laughed, a brittle sound that set my teeth on edge. "Privacy. Harold needs proper space for his recovery exercises. That little bedroom you call an office is the only suitable room with enough natural light. My office is also my workplace," I reminded her. "I see patients there." "Surely the hospital has rooms you could use instead." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "I'm an independent contractor for those telehealth sessions. The hospital doesn't provide space for them." Harold cleared his throat. "Diane, we discussed this. Emma's work is important. We agreed we wouldn't disrupt that." Again, that look of betrayal from Diane to her husband. I'd never seen Harold contradict her so directly before, and from her expression, neither had she. "I thought we'd all make reasonable accommodations," she said stiffly. "Family helps family." "That's exactly what this agreement is about," Mike said. "Reasonable accommodations on all sides. We're happy to help you and Dad during this transition, but we need to protect our home life too." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Protect it from what? From us? Your own parents?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This was the crux of it. Diane's fundamental belief that any boundaries were a rejection of her as a person, as a mother. "From unclear expectations and assumptions," I said carefully. "From potential conflicts before they arise. The only conflict here is the one you're creating with this contract." She practically spat the word. Harold put a gentle hand on his wife's arm. "Diane, please. They're being reasonable. This is their home." "And they're our children," she countered. "Family doesn't need contracts. Family sacrifices for each other." "Yes," Mike agreed, "which is why we're willing to adapt our lives to help you and Dad during this transition. But sacrifice goes both ways, Mom. Respecting our boundaries is your sacrifice." Diane fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the weighing of options and leverage. Finally, she pushed back her chair and stood. "I think we should go, Harold. Clearly, we're not as welcome as we thought." Harold didn't move. "Sit down, Diane." His tone, quiet but uncompromising, seemed to surprise everyone at the table, Diane most of all. "Harold, they're treating us like adults who respect their children's home," he finished for her. "Sit down. We're going to discuss this reasonably." For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then, remarkably, Diane slowly lowered herself back into her chair. Harold turned to us, his expression serious but not unkind. "This agreement is thoughtful and fair. I appreciate you taking the time to consider what would make this arrangement work for everyone." Mike visibly relaxed beside me. Thanks, Dad. However, Harold continued, I think a few modifications might make it more workable. He pulled a pen from his pocket. May I? Mike nodded and I leaned forward, curious and cautiously optimistic. This was not how I'd expected the evening to unfold. Harold began annotating his copy of the agreement, explaining as he went. The financial contribution is fair, but perhaps we could structure it as covering specific expenses, groceries, utilities, rather than a flat monthly payment. Might feel less transactional that way. That makes sense, I agreed, surprised and relieved by his constructive approach. For the duration, he continued, 3 months is reasonable as a starting point, but perhaps we could include a clause about monthly check-ins to assess progress on finding a new place. That way, if we need an extension, it's part of an ongoing conversation, not a sudden crisis. Mike nodded. Good idea, Dad. Harold glanced at his wife, who sat rigid with disapproval. And regarding use of space, I wonder if we might find a compromise for Emma's office. Perhaps certain hours when it could be used for my physical therapy, scheduled in advance around Emma's patient appointments. Before I could respond, Diane interjected. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't have to schedule time in our own children's home. It's not our home, Diane, Harold said with surprising sharpness. That's the point you seem to be missing. It's Michael and Emma's home, and they're generously offering to share it with us temporarily. The room fell silent. Diane looked genuinely shocked, as if Harold had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. You're taking their side, she finally managed. This isn't about sides, he replied. It's about respect. They've created a thoughtful framework for us to live together successfully. The least we can do is engage with it in good faith. Glanced at Mike, who looked as astonished as I felt. In all our discussions and planning, we'd anticipated Diane's resistance, but we'd never considered that Harold might become our strongest ally. I think scheduled use of the office could work, I offered, wanting to reinforce Harold's reasonable approach. As long as it's planned in advance so I can arrange my patient's schedule accordingly. Harold smiled. Thank you, Emma. He turned to Diane. See? Compromise is possible when everyone approaches it with respect. Diane looked from Harold to Mike to me, clearly recognizing she was outnumbered. Her next words surprised me. May I have some time to review this more carefully? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Since apparently we're proceeding with this formality, I'd like to understand exactly what we're agreeing to. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a retreat from outright rejection. I'd take it. Of course, Mike said. Take whatever time you need. We're not trying to rush you. Though we would appreciate a decision before Wednesday, I added gently. If this arrangement doesn't work for you, we'll need time to help you find alternatives. Diane's eyes flashed, but she nodded stiffly. We'll discuss it at home and let you know tomorrow. Thank you for dinner, Harold said as he carefully rose from his chair. It was excellent, as always, Emma. You're not staying for dessert? Mike asked, though relief was evident in his voice. I think we've had enough to digest for one evening, Harold replied with a small smile. Metaphorically speaking. As we walked them to the door, I noticed Harold moving with more confidence than when he'd arrived. His cane seemed more precautionary than necessary. Perhaps his recovery was progressing better than Diane had led us to believe. We'll call you tomorrow, Harold promised, giving Mike's shoulder a squeeze before turning to me. Thank you for your honesty, Emma. It's refreshing. Diane said nothing as they left, her silence more unnerving than her usual criticisms. When the door closed behind them, Mike and I looked at each other in stunned silence for a moment before he spoke. Did my dad just stand up to my mom? In public? Taking our side? I think he did, I said, equally bewildered. Has that ever happened before? Mike shook his head slowly. Never. Not like that. He walked to the living room and sank onto the couch. All these years, I thought he was just conflict averse, that he went along with Mom because it was easier. But tonight, maybe his health scare changed his perspective, I suggested, sitting beside him. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying priorities. Maybe. Mike looked thoughtful. Or maybe he's always had opinions, but rarely felt strongly enough to voice them. Until now. I leaned my head on his shoulder, processing the evening's unexpected turns. Do you think they'll sign the agreement? Dad will, Mike said confidently. Mom, I honestly don't know. This is uncharted territory. We sat in contemplative silence, the tension of the evening slowly dissipating. Regardless of what happened next, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Harold had shown himself to be an unexpected ally, and Diane had encountered resistance from a quarter she'd likely never anticipated. What if she refuses? I finally asked, voicing the question that still worried me. Mike took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Then, we'll deal with it together. But I won't back down on this, Emma. Even if it means helping them find another living arrangement. His certainty filled me with both relief and apprehension. We were standing our ground, together. But the consequences, potentially permanent, damage to Mike's relationship with his mother, loomed large. Try not to worry too much tonight, Mike said, kissing my forehead. Dad's on our side. That changes everything. He was right, of course. Harold's support had completely altered the equation. What I'd expected to be a 2-against-2 confrontation had become 3-against-1, with Diane isolated in her opposition. As we cleaned up dinner, saving the untouched dessert for tomorrow, I felt cautiously optimistic. We'd presented our boundaries clearly, Harold had responded constructively, and even Diane had stepped back from outright rejection to consideration. It wasn't victory, but it was progress. The phone rang just as we were getting ready for bed. Mike checked the caller ID and his eyebrows shot up. It's Dad, he said, answering the call. Hey, Dad, everything okay? I watched Mike's face as he listened, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and finally something like resignation. I see, he said. Yes, that's fine. No, don't worry about that now. We'll figure it out. Another pause. Of course. We'll see you then. Good night, Dad. He hung up and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. What happened? I asked, my heart racing. Mike looked up, his expression complex. They had a huge fight when they got home. Dad said Mom was irrational about the agreement, saying we were disrespecting her and trying to control her with legal mumbo-jumbo. That sounds like Diane, I said. But what happened? Why did he call so late? Mike took a deep breath. Dad packed a bag and checked into the Marriott. He said he needs space from Mom's emotional manipulation. His words, not mine. And he asked if our offer of a place to stay still stands. For just him. I stared at Mike, trying to absorb this bombshell. Your dad left your mom over our agreement? Not exactly, Mike clarified. He said it was the last straw in a pattern that's been building for years. Apparently, Mom's controlling behavior has been getting worse since his stroke, and he's been reevaluating what he wants from his remaining years. Wow. It was all I could manage. The idea of Harold, steady, quiet Harold, walking out, on Diane after decades of marriage was almost impossible to fathom. He's coming over tomorrow morning to talk, Mike continued. He wants to see if he can stay with us while he figures out his next steps, on our terms, with full acceptance of the agreement. I sat beside Mike on the bed, taking his hand. How do you feel about that? He thought for a moment. Conflicted, worried for both of them, but also proud of Dad, in a way. Standing up for himself, couldn't have been easy. What about your mom? Will she be okay alone? Mike gave a humorless laugh. According to Dad, she's already called my sister Olivia to come stay with her and help her through this betrayal. His tone suggests Olivia got an earful about us too. Great. Now we'd have Diane's daughter, who'd always viewed me with suspicion, solidly aligned against us. This family living agreement had certainly stirred up more than we'd anticipated. So what do we do now? I asked. Mike squeezed my hand. We stick to the plan. Dad respects our boundaries and wants to stay here on those terms. We welcome him. As for Mom, the door remains open if she can accept the same terms. It sounded simple when he put it that way, but we both knew the reality would be anything but. Diane wouldn't take this perceived betrayal by her husband, her son, and her daughter-in-law lightly. There would be consequences, likely dramatic ones. One day at a time, Mike said, as if reading my thoughts. Starting with Dad tomorrow. I nodded, trying to absorb the seismic shift in our family landscape. What had begun as a simple boundary-setting exercise had triggered what appeared to be the collapse of a 40-year marriage. The weight of that reality settled heavily on my shoulders. This isn't your fault, Mike said firmly. Or mine. If Dad says this has been building for years, we have to believe him. I know, I said, though the guilt wasn't so easily dismissed. I just never imagined things would escalate like this. Neither did I. Mike pulled me into a hug. But maybe it needed to happen. Maybe this is healthier than decades more of Dad silently enabling Mom's controlling behavior. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I wanted to believe it. As we turned out the lights and settled into bed, my mind raced with questions about what tomorrow would bring. Harold living with us, Diane aligned with Olivia against us. Years of family dynamics suddenly upended. One thing was certain. Our simple house rules contract had accomplished far more than we'd ever intended. Whether that was ultimately for better or worse remained to be seen. The next morning dawned with a sense of unreality. I'd slept fitfully, my dreams filled with arguments and slammed doors. When I finally gave up on sleep around 6, I found Mike already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at his phone with a troubled expression. "Your dad?" I asked, reaching for my own mug. He nodded. "Just texted. He's coming. At 9. Mike ran a hand over his face, looking exhausted. Also got 3 missed calls from Mom overnight, but no voicemails. I sat across from him at the counter, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Are you going to call her back?" "Not yet. I need to talk to Dad first, get his side without Mom's interpretation." "Good idea." I hesitated, then added, "Mike, are you really okay with your dad staying here without your mom? It's going to make things even more complicated." He considered this, his expression somber. "Honestly, I don't know. But if Dad needs space from Mom, I can't refuse him, especially not after he supported us yesterday." I nodded, understanding his loyalty. "What about your office? Would you mind if he used the guest room temporarily? I could move some of my patient equipment into the living room on my telehealth days." Mike looked surprised by my offer. "You'd do that? After fighting so hard to keep your office space?" "Your dad isn't trying to take over our home," I pointed out. "He's respecting our boundaries and asking for help on our terms. That's different." A soft smile crossed Mike's face as he reached for my hand. "Have I mentioned lately that I married an amazing woman?" "Not since yesterday," I teased, squeezing his fingers. "But I'll take the compliment." We spent the next couple of hours preparing, making the guest room more comfortable, clearing space in the bathroom cabinet for Harold's medications, checking our pantry for the heart-healthy foods his doctor had recommended. Normal, practical tasks that helped distract us from the emotional storm brewing beyond our walls. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Harold stood on our porch, a single suitcase beside him, looking simultaneously lighter and more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Thank you for having me," he said as we welcomed him in. Something in his voice, a catch, a hesitation, suggested he'd been crying. "Always, Dad," Mike replied, taking the suitcase. "Come in. We've got coffee ready." Harold settled at our kitchen table, accepting the mug I offered with a grateful nod. Up close, I could see the toll the night had taken. Dark circles under his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands that hadn't been there yesterday. "I owe you both an explanation," he began after a long sip of coffee. "You don't owe us anything," Mike assured him, "but we're here to listen if you want to talk about it." Harold nodded, gathering his thoughts. "What happened last night wasn't just about your agreement, though that was the catalyst. Diane and we've been growing apart for years. My stroke brought things to a head." "How so?" I asked gently. "When you face your mortality, it clarifies things," Harold said, echoing my words from the night before. "I realized I've spent 40 years letting Diane make all the decisions, dictate all the terms. It was easier that way. She's always been the strong one, the decisive one. I told myself I was being supportive, but really, I was being passive." Mike leaned forward, clearly surprised by this level of introspection from his usually reticent father. "Dad, I had no idea you felt that way." "Neither did I, not consciously," Harold admitted. "But these past few months, with Diane micromanaging my recovery, making decisions about our house without consulting me, planning our future around her preferences," he sighed, "I started feeling invisible in my own life. And when I saw how she dismissed your perfectly reasonable boundaries last night, boundaries I wish I'd established decades ago, something just snapped." I exchanged a glance with Mike, both of us processing this unexpected vulnerability from Harold. "What happened when you got home?" Mike asked. Harold stared into his coffee. "She ranted the entire drive about how disrespectful you both were, how children today don't understand family obligation, how Emma was turning you against her." He looked up apologetically. "No offense, Emma." "None taken," I assured him, well familiar with Diane's opinion of my influence over Mike. "When we got home, I tried to explain why I thought the agreement was reasonable. She accused me of taking your side against her, said I was being manipulated. I never thought I'd see my parents split up." "They haven't split up yet," I reminded him gently. "Your dad mentioned counseling. He's trying to find a way forward." "Yeah, but Mom would have to be willing to change, to compromise." "When has that ever happened?" He had a point. In all the years I'd known Diane, I'd never seen her concede a point or admit a mistake. Even the smallest disagreements were opportunities for her to establish dominance, not find common ground. "People can surprise you," I said, though my tone lacked conviction. "Your dad certainly has." Mike's phone rang, the sound unnaturally loud in our quiet kitchen. He checked the screen and grimaced. "Speaking of surprises, it's Olivia." I tensed. Mike's relationship with his sister had always been complicated. Olivia, 7 years older and fiercely protective of their mother, had never fully accepted me into the family. She'd be even less inclined to do so now. "Do you want privacy?" I asked, already moving toward the door. Mike caught my wrist. "Stay. Please. I want you to hear whatever she has to say." I nodded, settling back against the counter as he answered the call on speaker. "Hey, Liv," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Michael." Olivia's clipped tone carried clearly through the phone. "Would you like to explain why Dad is checked into a hotel and Mom is completely devastated?" Mike took a deep breath. "It's complicated, Liv. Mom and Dad had a disagreement." "About your contract," she interrupted. "The insulting list of rules you and Emma created to make Mom feel unwelcome in your home." I bit my tongue, letting Mike handle his sister. It wasn't insulting, Liv. It was a reasonable set of boundaries for adults sharing living space. Dad agreed with all of it. Of course he did, Olivia scoffed. Dad would agree with anything to keep the peace. You put him in an impossible position. Actually, Mike countered, his patience visibly thinning. Dad was the one who offered constructive feedback on the agreement. He's perfectly capable of forming his own opinions. Since when? Olivia demanded. Dad has followed Mom's lead on everything for 40 years. Then suddenly he's got all these independent thoughts. Please. It's obvious Emma put you both up to this. I stiffened at the accusation, but Mike squeezed my hand, silently asking me to let him handle it. That's unfair, Liv. Emma and I made this decision together, as a couple, and Dad made his own choice to leave last night. No one forced him. Right, Olivia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. He just spontaneously decided to abandon his wife of 4 decades because of one little disagreement. Nothing to do with your precious boundaries or Emma's obvious dislike of Mom. I don't dislike your mother, I said, unable to remain silent any longer. I just wanted clear expectations before she moved into our home. Oh, hello, Emma, Olivia said coldly. I didn't realize I was on speaker. How convenient that you're hovering right there to monitor what Mike says to his own sister. That's enough, Liv, Mike snapped. I asked Emma to stay. We're a team. And I'm not going to let you talk to her like that. The line went quiet for a moment before Olivia spoke again, her voice tight with anger. I see where your loyalties lie. Mom's sitting here in pieces, Dad's gone, and you're just fine with that as long as your precious boundaries aren't crossed. That's not fair, Mike protested. I care about Mom and Dad both, but I'm not responsible for the issues in their marriage. No, you just provided the catalyst for its destruction, Olivia shot back. Congratulations on that achievement. I could see Mike struggling to maintain his composure. Liv, I understand you're upset, but this situation is more complicated than you realize. Dad's felt neglected and controlled for years. The agreement just brought those feelings to the surface. And you believe that? Olivia asked incredulously. Rather than the obvious truth that your contract made him feel he had to choose sides, and he chose the path of least resistance? Why don't you talk to Dad yourself? Mike suggested. Hear his perspective directly instead of just assuming you know what he thinks. There was a pause before Olivia answered. Dad's not answering my calls. Another coincidence, I'm sure. He's sleeping right now, Mike explained. He had a rough night. But I'm sure he'll call you back when he wakes up. He's there? Olivia's voice sharpened. At your house? Mike hesitated, then sighed. Yes, he came this morning. He needed somewhere to stay. So you're harboring him, Olivia interrupted. Keeping him away from Mom while she's devastated. Perfect. Just perfect. We're not harboring anyone, I interjected, my patience wearing thin. Harold is an adult who made his own decision to take some space. He's welcome here for as long as he needs. Of course he is, Olivia said bitterly. Why wouldn't you encourage the destruction of my parents' marriage? It gives you exactly what you wanted. Mike all to yourself without his pesky family interfering. That's enough. Mike's voice rose sharply. Liv, I love you, but you're being completely unfair to Emma. She's done nothing wrong here. Keep telling yourself that, Olivia replied. Meanwhile, Mom is falling apart, and you're both playing house with Dad like everything's fine. Nothing about this situation is fine, Mike said wearily. But demonizing Emma isn't going to fix anything. Dad made his own choice. You need to respect that. What I need, Olivia said coldly, is for my brother to remember where he came from. But apparently that's too much to ask. The line went dead as she hung up. Mike set his phone down with a controlled deliberateness that told me he was fighting to maintain his composure. Well, that went about as well as expected. I moved to him immediately, wrapping my arms around his waist. I'm sorry. I know that was hard. He hugged me back, resting his chin on top of my head. Not your fault. Liv's always been Mom's fiercest defender, even when Mom is clearly in the wrong. Family loyalties run deep, I murmured against his chest. And Olivia's only hearing one side of the story right now. True, Mike sighed. But even if she heard Dad's perspective, I'm not sure she'd believe it. She's been Team Diane her whole life. We stood in silence for a moment, drawing comfort from each other's presence. The morning had already been emotionally draining, and it wasn't even noon. I should call Mom, Mike said eventually, though he made no move to reach for his phone. Are you sure that's wise right now? I asked carefully. You're already drained from dealing with Olivia. Maybe give yourself a little time to regroup. He considered this, then nodded. You're probably right. Mom's not alone. She has Liv. And anything I say right now will just get filtered through. Olivia's interpretation anyway. Exactly. Give Harold some time to rest. Give yourself some space to process, and then decide how to approach your mom. Mike looked at me gratefully. How did you get so wise about family dynamics, only child? I smiled ruefully. Years of observing yours, plus all those family therapy books I read when we first got engaged. He raised an eyebrow. You read therapy books about dealing with in-laws? I wanted to understand the Chen family ecosystem, I admitted. Diane was intimidating from day one. Mike laughed softly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. You're something else, Emma Chen, preparing for marriage like it was a military campaign. Know thy enemy, I teased, then quickly sobered. Not that your mom is the enemy, just a formidable opponent, Mike supplied. It's okay. I'm under no illusions about my mother's challenging personality. I stepped back, suddenly remembering my coffee plans. Speaking of formidable, I'm meeting Jess at 2 to update her on all this. Will you be okay here with your dad? We'll be fine, Mike assured me. Might do us both good to have some father-son time. He hesitated, then added, just maybe don't share every detail with Jess, at least not until things settle a bit. I understood his concern. While Jess was my closest friend, she could be protective to the point of ferocity. Her dislike of Diane was well established, and she'd be all too eager to cast Harold as the heroic rebel against tyranny, which might oversimplify a complex situation. I'll be discreet, I promised. General outline only. Thank you. Mike kissed my forehead. For everything. I don't know how I'd navigate this family maze without you. I touched his cheek gently. That's what partners do. Navigate mazes together. When I arrived at the daily grind that afternoon, Jess was already waiting, 2 steaming mugs on the table before her. Her expression was eager, almost gleeful with anticipation. Spill, she demanded as soon as I sat down. What happened? Did the Ice Queen sign your masterpiece, or did she breathe fire all over it? I took a fortifying sip of the latte she'd ordered for me. It's complicated. Jess leaned forward, her lawyer instincts clearly sensing a story. Complicated how? Did she refuse? Threaten to disown Mike? What? Diane refused, yes. I began carefully. But the unexpected part is, Harold supported our agreement, completely. Jess's eyes widened. The father-in-law? Mr. Silent Enabler. Himself stood up to the dragon lady. This I need to hear. I gave her a condensed version of the previous evening's dinner, emphasizing Harold's constructive approach to the agreement and his unexpected assertiveness. Fascinating, Jess murmured when I finished. The quiet ones always surprise you. So what happened after they left? Did she begrudgingly agree to his modifications? I hesitated, weighing how much to share. Not exactly. They had a serious disagreement at home, about more than just the agreement, apparently. And? Jess prompted, clearly sensing I was holding back. "And Harold decided he needed some space," I said carefully. "He's actually staying with us for a while." Jess nearly choked on her coffee. "Wait, what? The father-in-law moved in but not the mother-in-law? Oh, that is delicious irony." "It's not a victory, Jess," I admonished gently. "Their marriage is in serious trouble. Harold's talking about counseling, but he's also mentioned the possibility of separation if Diane won't compromise." "Wow." Jess sobered slightly. 40. Years of marriage on the line because of a house rules contract. That's actually kind of sad. "The contract was just the catalyst," I explained. "Harold says there have been issues for years. Diane's controlling behavior, his passivity. His stroke made him reevaluate everything." Jess nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. Nothing like a brush with mortality to clarify what you will and won't tolerate anymore." She studied my face. "But there's something else, isn't there? You look more stressed than triumphant." I sighed, unable to hide anything from her perceptive gaze. "Mike's sister Olivia is involved now. She's staying with Diane, who's apparently devastated, and she called this morning to berate Mike for destroying their parents' marriage." "Ah," Jess grimaced sympathetically. "The sister who's never liked you. I'm guessing she's found a way to make this your fault?" "According to Olivia, I've manipulated both Mike and Harold against poor, innocent Diane," I confirmed with a wry smile. "Apparently, I've been playing the long game, waiting for just the right moment to destroy their family." "Your evil genius knows no bounds," Jess deadpanned, then grew serious. "How's Mike handling all this?" "Better than I would have expected," I admitted. "He's firmly on our side, and his dad's, but he's worried about his mom too. And now, there's tension with Olivia." "Family drama of epic proportions," Jess summarized. "All because you had the audacity to ask for basic respect in your own home." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressing down again. "I keep wondering if there was another way we could have handled this, a gentler approach that wouldn't have triggered this cascade." "Hey." Jess reached across the table to grasp my hand firmly. "Don't do that. You set reasonable boundaries in a respectful way. Harold, a grown man with decades of life experience, made his own choices. Diane, another adult with agency, made hers. None of that is on you." "I know that logically," I said. "But emotions aren't logical, are they?" "No, they're not," Jess agreed. "But that's why you have me, to remind you of the logic when your emotions try to assign you blame for other people's choices." I smiled gratefully at my friend. "What would I do without you?" "Suffer in silence, probably," she replied cheerfully. "Now, strategic thinking time. What's the next move?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Next move?" "Yes," Jess said with the clarity of someone accustomed to planning legal strategies. "Harold's with you, Diane's with Olivia, everyone's in their separate corners. What happens next? How do you move forward from here?" It was a good question, one I hadn't had time to consider in the whirlwind of the morning's events. I guess that depends partly on Harold, and on Diane, though I'm not optimistic about her suddenly developing flexibility. "Assume she won't change," Jess advised. "Plan for the worst-case scenario, then anything better is a bonus." "Worst case," I pondered. "Harold stays with us longer term. Diane refuses counseling. Their marriage ends. Olivia blames us forever. Family gatherings become impossibly awkward battlegrounds." Jess winced. "That's pretty bleak, but not impossible to navigate. Harold clearly values his relationship with Mike, and you. That's something positive to build on." I nodded, finding comfort in her practical approach. "You're right, and maybe once the initial shock wears off, Diane might be more open to compromise. She loves Harold in her way." "People can surprise you," Jess acknowledged. "Just don't count on it with someone like Diane." Her type rarely admits fault or changes course. As I drove home from coffee with Jess, her words echoed in my mind. Don't count on change from Diane. Plan for the worst-case scenario. It was solid advice from a pragmatic friend, but something about it felt incomplete. There had to be a way forward that didn't end with permanent family fracture. I was still mulling this over when I pulled into our driveway and noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street in front of our house. A sleek silver sedan that screamed luxury lease rather than family-owned. As I got closer, my stomach dropped. I recognized the proud Oakdale College parent sticker on the bumper, Nathan's car, which meant Olivia was here. I briefly considered driving around the block to delay the inevitable confrontation, but that would be cowardice. This was my home. I belonged here regardless of who had decided to pay an unannounced visit. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my purse and walked to the front door, mentally preparing for whatever storm awaited inside. I unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, hoping to assess the situation before announcing my presence. The sound of tense voices carried from the living room, Mike's measured tone contrasting with Olivia's sharp, insistent cadence. I couldn't make out Harold's voice, but a third person was definitely responding to Olivia's accusations. He's a grown man making his own decisions, Mike was saying as I stepped into the entryway. You can't force him to go back if he's not ready. This isn't about force, Olivia retorted. This is about responsibility and commitment. 40 years of marriage doesn't just evaporate because of one disagreement. I hung my purse on the hook by the door and steeled myself before walking into the living room. 3 heads turned in my direction, Mike looking relieved to see me, Harold appearing weary but resolute, and Olivia, whose expression hardened instantly. Emma, she said, my name sounding like an accusation in her mouth. How convenient. We're just discussing the family crisis you helped engineer. I refused to take the bait. Hello, Olivia. Nathan. I nodded to Olivia's husband, who sat uncomfortably on the edge of our armchair, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. I didn't realize you were visiting today. This isn't a social call, Olivia said crisply. She turned back to her father. Dad, please. Mom is devastated. She hasn't stopped crying. She needs you at home. Harold sighed, the sound of a man who had explained himself multiple times without being heard. Olivia, I've already told you. I'm not coming home until your mother agrees to counseling. We need professional help to work through our issues. What issues? Olivia demanded. You've been happily married for decades. Happy for whom? Harold asked quietly. The question hung in the air, profound in its simplicity. Olivia blinked, momentarily thrown off her practiced speech. What's that supposed to mean? She finally managed. Harold leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. Olivia, I care for your mother deeply, but our marriage has been unbalanced for years. I've prioritized her happiness over my own for so long that I stopped recognizing when I was unhappy. That's marriage, Olivia insisted. Compromise, sacrifice. From both partners, Harold corrected gently. Not just one. Mike caught my eye and patted the space beside him on the couch. I joined him, our shoulders touching in silent solidarity as his sister and father continued their standoff. So, that's it? Olivia said, anger barely masking hurt. After all these years, you're just walking away because of some midlife crisis? I'm 68, Olivia, Harold pointed out with a hint of dry humor. A bit late for midlife anything, and I'm not walking away. I'm asking for change. There's a difference. Nathan cleared his throat, speaking for the first time since I'd entered. Perhaps we could all take a step back. This is obviously an emotional situation for everyone. Olivia shot him an irritated look. This isn't about emotions. This is about responsibility. Dad has responsibilities to Mom, to our family. And what about Mom's responsibilities to Dad? Mike interjected. Or doesn't that factor into your Equation? She's been a devoted wife for 40 years, Olivia snapped. On her terms, Harold said quietly. Always on her terms. Olivia turned to me suddenly, eyes narrowing. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching our family fall apart? While you sit there smugly with your precious boundaries. Before I could respond, Mike straightened beside me. That's uncalled for, Liv. Emma's been nothing but supportive of Dad, and respectful about Mom, despite how difficult she's made things. Difficult? Olivia scoffed. Yes. How terribly difficult to have a mother-in-law who cares about her son's well-being. There's a difference between caring and controlling, I said, finally breaking my silence. Your mother confuses the two. Olivia's eyes flashed. How dare you psychoanalyze her? You've been looking for ways to edge her out of Mike's life since day one. That's not true, I said calmly, refusing to match her anger. I've tried very hard to build a relationship with your mother. She's the one who's been resistant. Because she sees through you, Olivia declared triumphantly. She knew exactly what you were doing with that insulting contract, creating a problem where none existed to drive a wedge between her and Mike. Harold sighed heavily. Olivia, enough. The agreement was reasonable. I helped revise it myself. This situation isn't Emma's fault, or Michael's. Then whose fault is it, Dad? Olivia demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, everything was fine until they drew up that contract. Things weren't fine, Harold said firmly. They were tolerable. There's a difference. And sometimes it takes an external catalyst to reveal what's been broken. Underneath for years. Nathan glanced at his watch, then touched his wife's arm. Liv, we should probably head back. Your mother's alone, and we promised we wouldn't be long. She's waiting for me to bring Dad home, Olivia said, her voice softening as she turned to Harold again. She's ready to forgive you, Dad. She just wants you to come home where you belong. Harold's expression was gentle but determined. Forgive me? For what, exactly? For asking to be treated as an equal partner? For wanting my opinions respected? For supporting Michael and Emma's reasonable boundaries? For abandoning her, Olivia exclaimed, frustration breaking through her controlled facade. For walking out without warning after 40 years. I warned her for months, Harold said, quietly. Every time I asked for more input in our decisions, every time I suggested compromise, every time I expressed dissatisfaction with her controlling behavior. She didn't listen, Olivia. She never has. Olivia stood abruptly, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't recognize you anymore. This isn't the father who taught me about loyalty and commitment. I'm still teaching you about those things, Harold replied, his voice steady. But I'm also teaching you about self-respect and healthy boundaries. Lessons I should have demonstrated long ago. Olivia shook her head, gathering her purse. Mom's right. They've poisoned you against her. Against us. Liv, Mike began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. Don't. Just don't. She looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering longest on her father. When you come to your senses, you know where to find us. Oh. With that, she strode toward the door, Nathan following with an apologetic glance over his shoulder. The front door closed with a decisive click rather than the slam I'd half expected. Silence descended on the living room, thick with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Finally, Harold broke it with a deep sigh. I'm sorry you both had to witness that. Olivia has always been protective of her mother. You have nothing to apologize for, Dad, Mike assured him. Liv made her choices. She doesn't speak for all of us. Harold nodded, though fatigue lined his face. Still, this isn't what I wanted. Division in the family, sides being chosen. You didn't create the division, I said gently. You just stopped papering over the cracks that were already there. Harold considered this, then smiled faintly. A wise perspective, Emma. Thank you. He stood carefully, one hand on his cane. If you'll excuse me, I think I need to lie down for a bit. These emotional confrontations take more out of me than they used to. Of course, Dad, Mike said, rising to help his father. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea? Just some quiet, Harold replied. And perhaps we could order dinner in tonight? I don't think any of us is up for cooking. Already planning on it, Mike assured him. Rest well. When Mike returned from settling his father, he collapsed beside me on the couch, emotional exhaustion evident in every line of his body. That was brutal, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Liv hasn't changed a bit. Still Mom's fiercest defender, regardless of the facts. I leaned against him, providing the silent support I knew he needed. She loves your mom. That's not a bad thing in itself. No, but her blind loyalty is. She refuses to see any nuance, any complexity. He sighed, heavily. I had no idea Dad was so unhappy. All these years. He hid it well, I observed. Even from himself, it sounds like. Mike nodded, his expression troubled. That's what worries me. If he suppressed his own needs for decades, what happens now that the dam has broken? Will he swing too far the other way? Refuse any reconciliation? It was a perceptive concern, one I hadn't considered. Do you think that's likely? He mentioned counseling, which suggests he wants to work things out. Maybe. Or maybe that's just his way of letting Mom down gently. Mike ran a hand through his hair. The thing is, I've never seen this side of Dad before. This assertiveness. It's like meeting a stranger wearing my father's face. People contain multitudes, I said softly, especially those who've spent years suppressing parts of themselves to keep peace. Mike was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. You know what's really getting to me? The parallels. Parallels? I prompted, though I suspected what he meant. Between Dad's situation and what could have been ours. His voice grew serious. If we hadn't established boundaries early, if I'd fallen into the same pattern of always giving in to keep peace, would that have been us in 40 years? Me walking out because I finally couldn't take it anymore? The thought sent a chill through me. That wouldn't have happened. We communicate. We compromise. Both of us. Now we do, Mike agreed. But relationships evolve. Patterns set in. It's so easy to slip into roles, the accommodator, the decider, without even realizing it. I'd never heard Mike philosophize about relationships this way. His father's situation had clearly triggered deep reflections. Maybe that's the silver lining in all this chaos, I suggested. A cautionary tale that's making us more mindful of our own patterns. Mike smiled slightly, squeezing my hand. Always finding the bright side. That's my Emma. Someone has to. I teased gently, trying to lighten the mood. So, dinner. What are we ordering? Dad suggested that Thai place on Maple, the one with the curry he likes. I nodded, reaching for my phone. Thai it is, and maybe we should open a bottle of wine. I think we've earned it after the day we've had. As I placed our order, Mike scrolled through his own phone, his expression growing troubled again. Mom's called 3 more times, he said when I finished the call, and texted. She wants to know why Dad isn't answering his phone. Is he actively ignoring her or just resting? I asked. His phone's off. Doctor's orders after the stroke. Regular. Rest periods without electronic disturbances. Mike hesitated. I should call her back, shouldn't I? Even if I don't have much to say. I considered this. If you don't, she'll just keep calling and getting more upset. True. He didn't look eager, but he nodded resolutely. Better to rip the bandage off. Would you mind giving me some privacy for this one? Of course. I stood, touching his shoulder supportively. I'll go check on dinner delivery status. Take all the time you need. I retreated to the kitchen, but couldn't help overhearing bits of Mike's conversation as his voice occasionally rose in response to what must have been accusatory statements from Diane. "That's not what happened, Mom." "No." Emma didn't insist. "Dad made his own choice." "Yes. He's here, but he's resting." "I can't make him call you, Mom. That's between you and Dad." After about 15 minutes, the conversation ended. I heard Mike's heavy sigh before he joined me in the kitchen, looking drained. "That bad?" I asked sympathetically. "Worse," he admitted, reaching for the wine bottle I'd opened. "She's convinced this is all an elaborate plot orchestrated by you, enabled by me, with Dad as an unwitting pawn." I rolled my eyes. "Yes, because I have nothing better to do than destroy 40-year marriages for fun. According to Mom, you're doing it to consolidate your control over me." Mike's tone was light, but I could tell the accusation bothered him. "Cut me off from my real family so I'm entirely dependent on you." "Ah, yes, my master plan," I said dryly. "Isolate you completely, except for your father who's literally living with us." Mike smiled weakly. Logic has never been Mom's strong suit when she's emotional. He took a long sip of wine. "She's coming over tomorrow," insists on speaking to Dad directly. I tensed. "And you agreed?" "What choice did I have? She's his wife. They need to talk eventually." He gave me an apologetic look. "I did specify afternoon when we'll both be home. I'm not subjecting Dad to that conversation alone." "Good call," I agreed, though anxiety fluttered in my stomach at the thought of Diane in our house tomorrow, emotional and accusatory. "Did you warn your dad yet?" Mike shook his head. "Thought I'd let him rest first. He'll need his strength for tomorrow." The doorbell rang, signaling our dinner's arrival. As Mike went to pay the delivery person, I set the table mechanically, my mind racing with possibilities for tomorrow's confrontation. Would Diane manage to manipulate Harold into returning home? Would she create an even deeper rift? Would she blame me to my face for everything that had gone wrong? By the time Harold joined us for dinner, looking refreshed from his rest, I had worked myself into a state of quiet anxiety. Mike must have noticed, because he squeezed my knee under the I table as we began serving the fragrant Thai dishes. "Everything okay?" Harold asked perceptively, noting the silent exchange. Mike cleared his throat. "Mom called. She, wants to come over tomorrow to talk to you." Harold nodded, unsurprised. "I expected as much. Did you agree to a time?" "Around 2, Mike said. "If that works for you. Emma and I will both be home then." "Thank you," Harold said sincerely. "I appreciate the support, though you shouldn't have to mediate between your parents." "We're not mediating," I assured him, "just providing neutral territory." Harold smiled knowingly. "And moral support, which I value more than I can express." He took a bite of green curry, then added, "I spoke with Dr. Marison this afternoon, by the way. She's agreed to see Diane and me together if Diane is willing." "That's promising," Mike said encouragingly. "Did you mention that to Mom when she called?" Harold shook his head. "My phone's been off. Part of my rest routine." He looked thoughtful. "Perhaps I should call her tonight. Prepare her for tomorrow's conversation." "Might be wise," I agreed. "Give her time to process before she arrives." Harold nodded, but seemed hesitant. "The challenge is keeping the conversation focused and productive." Diane has a talent for emotional deflection when confronted with uncomfortable truths. "That's putting it mildly," Mike muttered. "Perhaps begin with what you still value about your relationship," I suggested, "before addressing the changes you need." Harold looked at me appreciatively. "A diplomatic approach. You have good instincts, Emma." "I've had some practice navigating difficult conversations," I said with a small smile. "Indeed." Harold's eyes twinkled momentarily. "Diane can be challenging." The understatement broke the tension, and we all chuckled. For a moment, it felt almost normal. A family dinner with good food and gentle teasing. But reality hovered at the edges, the specter of tomorrow's confrontation impossible to fully ignore. After dinner, while Mike and I cleaned up, Harold retreated to the guest room to call Diane. We tried not to eavesdrop, but the occasional raised voice from Harold, unusual from the typically even-tempered man, suggested the conversation wasn't going smoothly. When he emerged an hour later, his expression was a complex mixture of determination and weariness. "She's still coming tomorrow," he reported, settling into an armchair. "Though I'm not optimistic about her willingness to consider counseling." "What did she say?" Mike asked, passing his father a cup of herbal tea. Harold sighed. "That we don't need strangers interfering in private matters. That if I'd just come home, we could work things out ourselves, like we always have." "Which means going back to the way things were," I observed. "Precisely." Harold took a sip of tea. When I pointed out that the way things were is exactly what I'm no longer willing to accept, she accused me of having my head turned by newfangled ideas about marriage. Mike raised an eyebrow. Newfangled ideas like mutual respect and equal partnership? Apparently so. Harold seemed more resigned than angry. The irony is that Diane considers herself quite progressive in many ways, just not when it comes to relinquishing control in her own home. Or accepting boundaries from her son and daughter-in-law, I added. Harold nodded thoughtfully. "You know, your boundary setting was quite instructive for me. Watching how Diane reacted to reasonable limits. It crystallized patterns I've observed for years but never fully acknowledged." "Glad our family drama could be educational," Mike said wryly. "More than educational," Harold corrected. "Inspirational, in a way. Seeing you two stand firm together, supporting each other." He paused, emotion briefly tightening his voice. It reminded me of what partnership should look like. I felt a surge of unexpected emotion at his words. In all the chaos of the past few days, I hadn't considered that our actions might have provided Harold with a positive model, not just a catalyst for confrontation. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Harold continued, "I want you both to know how grateful I am, not just for the room and board, but for showing me what's possible when people respect each other's boundaries." Mike looked visibly moved. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." We chatted a while longer, carefully steering the conversation away from tomorrow's looming meeting to lighter topics. Harold's photography hobby, a documentary series Mike had been watching, a challenging patient case I'd recently solved. It was a welcome respite from the emotional intensity of the day. Later that night, as Mike and I prepared for bed, the fullness of the situation settled over me again. "Tomorrow's going to be rough," I said as I applied moisturizer to my face. "Your mom will be coming in with 40 years of tactical experience." Mike, already in bed, looked up from his book. "Dad's held his own so far. He might surprise us again tomorrow." "I hope so," I said, climbing in beside him. "But Diane in person is different from Diane on the phone. She knows how to use her vulnerability as a weapon." "True," Mike agreed grimly. The tears, the wounded looks, the trembling voice, all deployed with surgical precision. I snuggled against him, seeking comfort in his warmth. "Should we have a strategy? Ground rules for the meeting?" "Like what? No character assassination, no rewriting history, no emotional manipulation?" He sounded skeptical. "Mom would just ignore them." "We could suggest a time limit," I proposed. "Keep the initial conversation to an hour, then take a break to process." Mike considered this. "That's not a bad idea, actually. Containment might help prevent total meltdown. And maybe designate the dining room as the conversation space," I added. "Keep the rest of the house as neutral territory." "Setting boundaries again?" Mike observed with a small smile. "It's almost like you've learned something from all This. I nudged him playfully. Very funny. I'm serious, though. Structure might help keep things from spiraling tomorrow. You're right, he acknowledged. I'll talk to Dad in the morning, see if he has preferences about how to structure the conversation. He kissed the top of my head. Now try to sleep. Tomorrow will come whether we're rested or not. Despite his advice, sleep proved elusive. I found myself replaying possible scenarios for tomorrow's confrontation, imagining Diane's accusations and my responses, Harold's stance and Mike's interventions. By the time I finally drifted off, my mind had constructed and deconstructed a dozen versions of the coming drama. Morning arrived too quickly. I woke to find Mike already up and moving quietly around the bedroom, trying not to disturb me. Time is it? I mumbled, reaching for my phone. Just after 8, he whispered. Go back to sleep if you want. Dad's already up, making coffee. I sat up, instantly alert. Harold's making coffee? Should he be doing that with his recovery? Mike smiled. Apparently, his doctor specifically encouraged normal activities, and he says making breakfast was always his domain before the stroke. Mom just took it over afterward and never gave it back. Another small revelation about their marriage dynamics. I wondered how many more such insights would emerge in the coming days. I'll be down in a minute, I said, reaching for my robe. We should talk about today before work. In the kitchen, Harold was indeed manning the coffee maker with surprising dexterity, considering his recent health challenges. He'd also toasted bagels and sliced fruit, arranging everything neatly on the breakfast bar. Good morning, he greeted me cheerfully. I hope you don't mind me commandeering your kitchen. It feels good to be useful. Not at all, I assured him, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. This is a treat. I was just telling Dad about our idea for structuring today's conversation, Mike said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel half. Harold nodded. Time limits and designated space. Very sensible. I've been thinking along similar lines myself. Any specific approaches you want to take? I asked, selecting a bagel for myself. Harold considered this as he sat at the counter with us. I believe in starting with positive intentions. I'll make it clear that I still care for Diane and value our history together. But I'll also be firm about my need for change and respect. And if she gets emotional or accusatory? Mike asked carefully. Then I'll calmly redirect the conversation back to the core issues, Harold replied with more confidence than I would have expected. Dr. Marison suggested specific phrasing, acknowledging feelings without accepting blame for having boundaries. I understand you're upset, but my need for respect is valid. I was impressed by his preparation. Sounds like your conversation with Dr. Marison was helpful. Immensely, Harold agreed. She's given me tools I wish I'd had decades ago. He took a thoughtful sip of coffee. The challenge will be maintaining my resolve in the face of Diane's. Well, Diane's considerable emotional arsenal. We'll be right there, Mike assured him. Not to intervene, but to support you holding your ground. Harold smiled gratefully. I appreciate that more than I can say. He glanced at the clock. Don't you two need to get ready for work soon? I'll be working from home today, I said, having made that decision sometime during my restless night. Rearranged my schedule. Same, Mike added. Told my team I needed a personal day. Harold looked touched and slightly embarrassed. You didn't have to do that on my account. We wanted to, I assured him. Family first. The phrase hung in the air, reminiscent of Diane's frequent declarations but carrying a distinctly different meaning in this context. Family first, not as an obligation or guilt trip, but as a choice freely made from love and support. Harold cleared, his throat clearly moved. Well then, perhaps we should use the morning to prepare. I'd welcome your thoughts on how to approach specific topics that might arise. Mike glanced at me, then back to his father. Like what, Dad? Like the house rules agreement that started all this, Harold replied. Diane will almost certainly bring it up as evidence of hostility toward her. I want to be ready to reframe it as what it actually was, a reasonable request for mutual respect. And so our morning unfolded, a strategy session of sorts, but one founded on honesty and mutual support rather than manipulation. As we talked through potential scenarios and responses, I found myself admiring Harold's growing clarity about his own needs and boundaries. The man who had seemed so passive just days ago was emerging as thoughtful and principled, capable of standing his ground without cruelty. By the time we broke for lunch, I felt as prepared as possible for Diane's arrival. We had a plan, we had support, and most importantly, we had truth on our side. Whether that would be enough against Diane's emotional tactics remained to be seen, but I took comfort in our unified approach. As the clock ticked toward 2, we arranged the dining room as agreed. Water glasses and tissues on the table, comfortable seating, a neutral space for what would undoubtedly be a challenging conversation. Mike put on calming background music at low volume, while I made sure the kitchen was stocked with tea and coffee for afterward. At precisely 1:55, Harold took his place at the table, his posture straight, his expression composed. Mike and I exchanged a glance, both recognizing the courage this moment required from him. "Whatever happens," Harold said quietly, "thank you both for creating a space where truth can be spoken." Before either of us could respond, the doorbell rang. 5 minutes early. Typical Diane asserting control from the outset. Mike squeezed my hand once before going to answer the door. I took a deep breath and prepared to face my mother-in-law, whose imminent arrival felt less like a family visit, and more like the opening salvo in a battle for the very definition of family itself. The moment Mike opened the door, Diane swept in like a perfectly coiffed hurricane. Her designer pantsuit was immaculate as always, but her eyes were rimmed with redness that her careful makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Where is he?" she demanded, without preamble, not even acknowledging my presence in the hallway. "Hello to you too, Mom," Mike said with remarkable patience. "Dad's waiting in the dining room." Diane's gaze darted toward me, a flash of accusation in her eyes before she looked away dismissively. "I prefer to speak with my husband privately." "That's not how this is going to work," Mike said firmly. "We agreed to meet here, in a neutral space, with Emma and me present." "Neutral?" Diane scoffed. "There's nothing neutral about this house or your wife's involvement." I bit back a retort, reminding myself that escalating tensions wouldn't help anyone. "Would you like some water before we sit down, Diane?" She ignored me completely, already moving toward the dining room with the determination of a general, advancing on enemy territory. Mike shot me an apologetic look as we followed. Harold rose when Diane entered, his posture straight but his expression gentle. "Diane, thank you for coming." She stopped short, as if surprised by his composure. Perhaps she'd expected to find him diminished somehow, regretful or uncertain. Instead, he stood tall, leaning only slightly on his cane, meeting her gaze steadily. "Harold," she said after a moment, her voice softening to the wounded tone I recognized as the opening move in her emotional strategy. "What are you doing? Why are you putting us through this?" "Please sit," Harold said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Diane remained standing, glancing around the carefully arranged space with obvious suspicion. "This feels like an intervention. Is that what this is? Have they convinced you I'm some kind of monster?" "No one thinks you're a monster, Mom," Mike said as he and I took seats at the sides of the table, maintaining our agreed-upon positions as supportive but not central to the conversation. "Then why are you both here? This is between Harold and me." Harold's voice was calm but firm. "I asked them to be here, Diane, as support and to ensure our conversation remains productive." Diane finally sat, though she perched on the edge of her chair as if prepared to leave at any moment. "Productive?" Is that what you call abandoning your wife of 40 years? Productive? I haven't abandoned our marriage, Harold clarified. I've removed myself from an unhealthy dynamic to gain perspective. There's an important difference. Diane's eyes narrowed. Perspective? Or influence? Her gaze shifted briefly to me. Certain people seem very invested in changing your perspective about our marriage. My decisions are my own, Harold stated. Simply. No one is manipulating me, Diane. That's part of what I need you to understand. A flash of uncertainty crossed Diane's face, quickly replaced by indignation. I don't understand any of this, Harold. We were fine. We were planning our next chapter together. Then suddenly you're walking out over some ridiculous house rules? The agreement was simply the catalyst, Harold said, echoing words he'd shared with us earlier. Our issues run much deeper and have been developing for years. What issues? Diane demanded. Name one serious problem in our marriage before all this nonsense. Harold didn't hesitate. Control. Your need for it and my surrender of it. For decades, I've deferred to your preferences, your decisions, your vision of our life together. I did it to keep peace, to make you happy. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Diane looked genuinely perplexed. Is this about the stroke? The doctor said emotional changes sometimes happen after. This isn't about the stroke, Harold interrupted gently. The stroke just made me realize how precious time is and how much of mine I've spent living according to someone else's terms. My terms? Diane's voice rose slightly. We've built a life together, a good life. A life you designed, Harold countered. Where did we live? In the neighborhood you chose. How did we decorate? In the style you preferred. Who did we socialize with? Your friends and colleagues. Even our retirement plans centered around your interests, not mine. You never objected to any of that, Diane said defensively. I tried, in small ways, but you always had counter-arguments. Reasons why your choice was better, more practical, more suitable. Eventually, it became easier not to express preferences at all. I watched Diane's face as Harold spoke, seeing genuine surprise mingled with disbelief. Was it possible she truly hadn't recognized the pattern he was describing? So this is my fault? She asked, her voice hardening. Because I made decisions when you wouldn't? It's not about fault, Harold said. It's about awareness and change. I share responsibility for the dynamic we created. I allowed it to happen, year after year. But I'm not willing to continue that pattern anymore. Diane's composure slipped slightly, her voice taking on a desperate edge. What does that even mean, Harold? What do you want from me? I want partnership, he said simply. Equal say in our decisions. Respect for my preferences. Space for my interests. And most importantly, I want you to recognize when you're being controlling rather than collaborative. Mike shifted beside me, clearly surprised by his father's directness. We'd prepared for various scenarios, but Harold's calm clarity exceeded all our expectations. Diane sat back in her chair, actually speechless for a moment. When she recovered, her approach shifted. I had no idea you felt this way, she said, her voice softer now, tears welling in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? All these years if you were unhappy. Time to strengthen my own sense of self outside our established dynamic? Diane looked wounded again. So I'm just supposed to wait, alone in our home, while you find yourself like some teenager? No, Harold said thoughtfully. You could use this time for reflection too. Consider what I've said about control and partnership. Perhaps even speak with a counselor individually. She scoffed lightly. I don't need a counselor to tell me my own mind. Then reflect in your own way, Harold suggested. But please truly reflect, Diane, on the patterns in our relationship, on how we both contributed to them, on whether You're willing to create something different moving forward. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through Diane's various emotional states: hurt, defensiveness, anger, confusion, occasional moments of genuine reflection. Throughout it all, Harold maintained his compassionate firmness, neither yielding his position nor attacking hers. Mike and I remained mostly silent, speaking only when directly addressed, offering water or tissues as needed. I was struck by the profound reversal unfolding before us. The woman who had arrived expecting to reclaim control of her husband was instead being gently but firmly guided toward self-examination. Eventually, Diane glanced at her watch. "I should go. Olivia's expecting me back for dinner." "Of course," Harold said. "Thank you for coming today, Diane. For listening, even when it was difficult." She stood, gathering her purse with slightly trembling hands. When might you decide about coming home?" "I'm not setting an arbitrary timeline," Harold replied. "But I'd like to check in again in a week. Perhaps we could meet at a cafe next time? Neutral ground for both of us." Diane nodded stiffly. "Fine, you have my number." The formal response couldn't quite mask the vulnerability beneath. "I'll walk you out," Mike offered, rising to accompany his mother to the door. As they left the dining room, Harold exhaled slowly, the first sign of fatigue he'd shown throughout the intense conversation. "You did wonderfully," I told him quietly. "Your clarity was remarkable." He smiled tiredly. "Thank you, Emma, for the support and for the space to have this conversation. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary." "Right." Mike returned a few minutes later, his expression thoughtful. "Mom's gone. She was pretty quiet on the way out." "Processing, I hope," Harold said, rather than planning countermeasures. Mike smiled faintly at his father's insight. "You know her well." 40 years, Harold replied simply. "I may have surrendered too much control, but I was always observing, understanding." I stood, suddenly aware of how emotionally drained we all must be. "I'll make some tea, or something stronger, if preferred." "Tea would be perfect," Harold said appreciatively. "And perhaps we could order dinner in again tonight? I find I don't have the energy for much else." The evening passed. Quietly, all three of us somewhat subdued after the emotional intensity of the afternoon. Harold retired early, leaving Mike and me alone in the living room, mulling over the day's events. "I've never seen Mom like that," Mike said as we curled together on the couch. "So? Thrown off balance? Vulnerable?" "Your dad's clarity seemed to surprise her," I observed. "Like she genuinely hadn't realized how he felt all these years." Mike nodded slowly. "I think that's possible. Mom lives so much in her own perspective, she might truly not have seen the impact of her behavior." "Do you think she'll agree to counseling?" He considered this, absently stroking my hair. "A week ago, I'd have said absolutely not. Now." He shrugged. "Maybe. She definitely wasn't prepared for Dad's firmness." "He's changed so much in just a few days," I marveled. "Or maybe he hasn't changed at all, just finally revealed who he's always been underneath." "Either way," Mike said thoughtfully, "I'm proud of him. Standing up for himself couldn't have been easy after so many years." "Like father, like son," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "You stood up for us too, when it mattered, against considerable pressure." He kissed the top of my head. "Best decision I ever made. After marrying you in the first place, of course." The next week unfolded in an unexpected rhythm. Harold settled into our home with remarkable ease, contributing to household tasks, respecting our space, and sharing insightful conversations over meals. He attended 2 individual counseling sessions with Dr. Marison, returning from each looking simultaneously drained and fortified. Diane called Harold daily, their conversations gradually evolving from strained and brief to somewhat more substantial. She hadn't yet agreed to counseling, but hadn't refused outright either. Progress of a sort, according to Harold. Olivia remained, firmly in her mother's camp, sending Mike accusatory texts that he mostly ignored, though I knew they bothered him more than he admitted. The family fracture was painful for him, especially when his sister began involving extended family, sharing her version of events with cousins and family friends. Let her talk, Harold advised when Mike mentioned this concern. People who truly know us will reserve judgment. Those who don't. He shrugged philosophically. Their opinions matter less than our truth. On the 7th day after Diane's visit, Harold announced his intention to find his own apartment. "You've both been incredibly generous," he told us over breakfast. "But I think it's time I established some true independence, at least temporarily." "You're welcome to stay longer," I assured him, surprised by how much I'd come to enjoy his presence in our home. "It's no imposition." "I know," he said, smiling warmly, "and that means more than I can express. But this isn't just about convenience. It's about my journey. I need to experience standing completely on my own, making my own choices, creating my own space, without either Diane's influence or your support." Mike looked both proud and concerned. "Are you sure you're ready health-wise? It's only been a few months since the stroke." "Dr. Patel gave me a clean bill of health last week," Harold reminded him. "Said my recovery has been remarkably swift. Besides, I'm not planning to climb mountains, just live independently in a single-level apartment with proper safety features." We couldn't argue with his reasoning, though the prospect of his departure created a surprising pang. In just a week, Harold had become an integral part of our household. A calm, wise presence whose genuine appreciation for our boundaries had been a healing counterbalance to years of Diane's boundary violations. "Will you tell Mom?" Mike asked. Harold nodded. "At our meeting tomorrow, which reminds me, would either of you be willing to help me look at apartments this afternoon? I've made appointments to see 3 places near the community college." "Of course," I said immediately. "I can rearrange my telehealth sessions." "I'll come too," Mike added. 3 sets of eyes are better than 2. Harold looked genuinely touched. "Thank you both, for everything." The apartment hunt proved surprisingly enjoyable. Harold approached each property with thoughtful consideration, asking insightful questions about lease terms and community amenities. By day's end, he'd settled on a bright 1-bedroom in a modern building with an elevator, accessible bathroom features, and a community garden he seemed particularly drawn to. "I think I could be happy here," he said as we stood on the small balcony overlooking the garden. "At least while I figure out next steps." "It's perfect," I agreed, noting the natural light and open floor plan that would accommodate his mobility needs. "When can you move in?" "They mentioned availability next week," Harold said. "I'll need to purchase some basics: bed, sofa, kitchenware. Nothing extravagant." "We can help with that too," Mike offered. "Weekend shopping trip?" Harold nodded gratefully. "I'd appreciate the company, and perhaps some guidance on contemporary furniture styles. I fear my taste is somewhat dated." "We'll introduce you to the wonders of mid-century modern," Mike teased. "Very hip for the distinguished gentleman." The light moment was interrupted by Harold's phone ringing. He checked the screen. "It's Diane. I should take this." Mike and I moved inside the empty apartment, giving him privacy on the balcony. Through the glass door, I could see Harold's expression shift from relaxed to serious as the conversation progressed. When he rejoined us several minutes later, his face was unreadable. "Everything okay?" Mike asked cautiously. "Interesting timing," Harold said. "Diane's agreed to counseling. 1 session, she emphasized, to see if it has any merit." "That's progress," I noted, genuinely surprised by the concession. "Indeed." Harold looked thoughtful. She also asked if I'd made any decisions about our future. I told her about my plan to rent an apartment. How did she take that? Mike asked. Better than expected, actually. Harold seemed mildly puzzled. She said perhaps some structured separation might help clarify things for both of us. Not at all the resistance I anticipated. On the drive home, Harold elaborated on his conversation with Diane. Something in her tone had shifted, he explained. Less desperate, more thoughtful. She'd mentioned speaking with her sister, who had apparently offered some surprisingly insightful perspectives on their situation. Claire always was the more introspective sister, Harold noted. Divorced twice herself, but remarkably wise. About relationships in retrospect. I'm glad Diane reached out to her. The next day, Harold met Diane at Riverside Bistro as planned. He returned looking contemplative but not distressed. She's different, he reported as we shared dinner that evening. More willing to listen, less quick to defend. She actually asked questions about my experience of our marriage, questions that seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. That sounds promising, I said cautiously. It does, Harold agreed, though I'm reserving judgment until I see if it lasts beyond initial conversations. Change isn't easy, especially changing patterns established over decades. Did you tell her about the apartment? Mike asked. Harold nodded. She asked to see it, actually. Said if I was determined to live separately for now, she wanted to make sure it was suitable for my condition. He chuckled lightly. Old habits die hard. But when I pointed out the controlling nature of that statement, she caught herself. Actually apologized. Mike and I exchanged surprised glances. Diane Chen, apologizing for being controlling? It seemed almost unbelievable. And the counseling? I prompted. Scheduled for next Tuesday, Dr. Marison's office. Harold looked, simultaneously hopeful and apprehensive. A step forward, at least. The following week brought a flurry of activity as we helped Harold prepare for his move. Shopping for furniture and household essentials, setting up utilities, packing the few belongings he'd brought to our house. Through it all, Harold maintained a quiet excitement, like someone embarking on a long-anticipated adventure. Diane called. Daily, her conversations with Harold growing longer and less tense. She even spoke briefly with Mike once, her tone noticeably less accusatory than in previous interactions. She didn't ask to speak to me, but neither did she make disparaging remarks about my influence, progress of a sort. The day before Harold's scheduled move, Olivia appeared unexpectedly at our door. Mike answered, his expression guarded as he invited his sister inside. I'm not staying, she said stiffly. I just came to drop this off for Dad. She held out a small gift bag, from Mom, for his new apartment. Mike accepted the bag with surprise. That's thoughtful. Dad's out with Emma picking up some final items, but I'll make sure he gets it. Olivia nodded, clearly uncomfortable. How is he, really? The genuine concern in her voice softened Mike's stance slightly. He's good, Liv. Excited about his new place. Looking forward to their counseling session. Mom mentioned that, Olivia said, her tone unreadable. Counseling, at their age. It's never too late to improve communication, Mike pointed out, mildly. Olivia studied her brother's face for a moment. You really believe all this is for the best, don't you? Dad living alone, their marriage in limbo. I believe Dad deserves to be happy, Mike replied carefully. So does Mom. If counseling and some time apart helps them figure out what that looks like, then yes, I support it. Olivia seemed to be weighing her next words carefully. Aunt Claire says Mom has been difficult for years. That everyone saw it, but no one wanted to confront her about it. She looked away, clearly uncomfortable with this admission. I always thought she was just strong, decisive. She is those things, Mike acknowledged. But sometimes strength becomes rigidity, and decisiveness becomes control. It's complicated. Yeah, Olivia shifted her weight, glancing toward her car. Anyway, make sure Dad gets that. It's a housewarming gift. Mom picked it out herself. After she left, Mike opened the gift bag curiously. Inside was a small, framed photograph of a younger Harold standing beside a flowering cherry tree, camera in hand, face alight with joy. I'd never seen the image before. Japan, Mike explained softly. Dad's photography tour about 15 years ago, his dream trip. He'd wanted to go for decades, and Mom finally agreed when he retired. He studied the photo thoughtfully. I can't believe she chose this particular memory. When Harold returned and saw the gift, his reaction was equally surprised. This was one of the happiest moments of my life, he said quietly. Diane always dismissed my photography as a hobby rather than a serious pursuit. For her to acknowledge it now, like this. Maybe she's really listening, I suggested. Reflecting on what you've said about your needs and interests being overlooked. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. It's a meaningful gesture regardless. The next day, we helped Harold move into his new apartment. The space transformed quickly from empty rooms to a comfortable home, with furniture we'd selected together, kitchen essentials I'd helped organize, and several of Harold's photographs, now framed and displayed prominently on the walls. It feels right, he said as we prepared to leave, looking around his new domain with quiet satisfaction. My space, my choices, a new chapter. We're just a phone call away, Mike reminded. Him, clearly emotional about this symbolic step in his father's journey. Anytime, day or night. I know. Harold embraced his son warmly. But I'll be fine. Better than fine, I think. He turned to me next, his hug equally affectionate. Thank you, Emma, for the house rules contract that started all this, and for everything since. Your courage in setting boundaries helped me find my own. I never expected it to lead here, I admitted, but I'm glad if it helped. More than you know, Harold assured me. As Mike and I drove home, our house felt strangely empty without Harold's calming presence. We'd grown accustomed to his morning coffee ritual, his thoughtful observations, his gentle humor. But underneath the mild sense of loss was a deeper feeling of rightness, the satisfaction of having supported someone we cared about through a crucial transition. Do you think they'll work it out? I asked as we settled onto the couch that evening. Your parents? Mike considered this, his expression contemplative. I'm not sure. Dad seems committed to change, and Mom seems, at least open to considering it. But 40 years of patterns don't transform overnight. True, I acknowledged. But they've taken first steps. That's something. Something significant, Mike. Agreed. He pulled me closer, kissing the top of my head. Speaking of significant, I've been thinking about our house rules contract, the document that launched 1,000 family revelations. What about it? I asked, curious about his reflective, and maybe we should have our own version, he suggested. Not because we need it for conflict resolution, but as a proactive commitment to communication and mutual respect, a blueprint for the marriage we want to build. The idea resonated deeply. I'd like that. A positive affirmation rather than a defensive measure. Mike smiled, his eyes warm with love and appreciation. Exactly. A declaration of our values, our commitments to each other. Something to revisit and refine as we grow together. As we discussed what such a document might include, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the man beside me, for his willingness to stand firm with me when it mattered, to examine family patterns critically, to envision our relationship as an evolving, intentional creation rather than a fixed hierarchy. 2 days later, Harold called with news from his first joint counseling session with Diane. It had been challenging but productive, he reported. Diane had been defensive initially, but gradually opened up as Dr. Marison skillfully guided the conversation. They'd agreed to weekly sessions for at least a month, with individual therapy continuing alongside. Diane actually said something quite remarkable as we were leaving, Harold told us, his voice reflecting surprised appreciation. She said she'd never realized how much her need for control had limited both our lives, that she's beginning to understand why I felt diminished. That's huge, Mike said, clearly stunned by his mother's insight. Did it seem genuine? I believe it was, Harold replied thoughtfully. Diane has many faults, but dishonesty isn't among them. If she's acknowledged a problem, it's because she truly recognizes it. The weeks that followed brought gradual, cautious progress. Harold settled into his independent life with surprising ease, joining a photography club at the community center, reconnecting with old colleagues, even volunteering at the local library. He and Diane continued their counseling, sometimes reporting breakthroughs, other times setbacks. Olivia began calling Mike more regularly, her initial hostility slowly giving way to cautious curiosity about their parents' evolving relationship. She even sent me a brief but civil text on my birthday, a small gesture that nonetheless signaled a potential thawing. 3 months after Harold's move-out day, he invited us to dinner at his apartment. When we arrived, we were surprised to find Diane already there, arranging flowers on the dining table she'd apparently helped Harold select. "Emma, Michael," she greeted us with noticeable effort at warmth. "Harold's made his famous paella. I brought dessert." The evening that followed was surreal in its relative normalcy. Conversation flowed more easily than I would have expected, focusing mainly on neutral topics: Harold's photography exhibition at the community center, Mike's new project at work, my recent professional certification. Diane seemed different, still. Organized and opinioned, but less domineering, more willing to listen when others spoke. After dinner, as Harold served coffee, Diane cleared her throat with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I owe you both an apology," she said, looking primarily at me. "My behavior regarding the living arrangement was controlling, disrespectful of your home and boundaries. I see that now." I nearly dropped my coffee cup in shock. Mike looked equally stunned. "Thank you, Diane," I managed after a moment. "That means a lot." She nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable, with the vulnerability of apology but determined to push through. "Well," it needed to be said, "Dr. Marison has been quite insistent about acknowledging impact." Harold smiled slightly at this, exchanging a knowing glance with us. Diane might be changing, but her fundamental nature, direct, somewhat awkward with emotion, remained intact. As we prepared to leave that evening, Diane mentioned casually that she and Harold had plans to attend a photography exhibit together that weekend. "His work is actually quite good," she observed with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "I never really looked properly before." On the drive home, Mike and I processed the unexpected evening. "Did that really happen?" I asked, still slightly dazed. "Did your mother actually apologize to me and compliment your dad's photography?" "Apparently," Mike said, sounding equally bewildered. "Dad said they were making progress in counseling, but I didn't expect that." "Do you think they'll reconcile? Move back in together?" Mike considered this. "Maybe eventually, but honestly, I think Dad's enjoying his independence, and Mom might need more time to truly change her patterns." "A new normal," I suggested. "Different from before, but potentially healthier for both of them." "Exactly." Mike reached for my hand across the console. "Speaking of new normals, how about we work on that relationship blueprint this weekend? Our own family living agreement, focused on the future we want to build. I'd like that, I agreed, squeezing his hand. Just promise me one thing. Anything. If I ever start acting like your mother, trying to control everything, dismissing your preferences, you'll call me on it immediately. Mike laughed. Same goes for me. Partnership, not control. Equal voices, mutual respect. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Oakdale, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past few months. What had begun as a simple boundary-setting exercise, a house rules contract for a difficult mother-in-law, had catalyzed profound changes throughout an entire family system. Harold had found his voice and independence. Diane had begun the difficult work of examining her controlling patterns. Even Olivia was slowly opening to new perspectives on family dynamics. Our home, once threatened with invasion, had instead become a sanctuary where truth could be spoken and boundaries respected. The contract that Diane had once deemed offensive had ultimately offered liberation, not just for Mike and me, but for an entire family trapped in decades of unhealthy patterns. As we pulled into our driveway, the porch light welcoming us home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for boundaries courageously drawn and upheld. Some might call it just a house rules contract. I knew better. It was nothing less than a declaration of relational independence, the beginning of a healthier story for all of us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.